Okay, so there's the recording notice for everyone. We're focusing on the costs of owning and driving an EV, and we want it to make it easier for you to decide whether or not to switch on the grounds of costs. We've already said that we're going to try and answer as many questions as we can, but we have taken some assumptions in this webinar, and one of them is that we're assuming that you agree that EVs are better for the environment than ICE or internal combustion engine vehicles. There's a whole suite of information about why they are better in terms of their full life cycle analysis, in terms of their emissions, for a whole host of reasons. So we're not going to be dwelling on the environmental credentials or the comparisons. That is a given as far as the webinar is concerned. We do acknowledge that there are ethical challenges involved in their manufacture and in the battery manufacture. And I know that Nigel will be posting you to a page on our website that expresses some of Kath's feelings about that and some of the steps that manufacturers are taking to address those environmental and ethical issues. We want people to swap to electric vehicles. They are, I won't even say they're the future, they're the present. Get going on it. But please bear in mind that if you can avoid traveling because you've planned sustainably, because you've decided to walk, to take the bus, to take public transport, to share your car, then please do that first and foremost, and only really resort to the private car when you absolutely have to. Enjoy the webinar. We have got three fantastic panelists. I'm not going to call you geeks, you're specialists, but I just love hearing every time from you because it's a fascinating subject. George Kinghorn, who's going to kick off this evening. He's from the Classic and Electrical Vehicles team over in Durham, runs his own business, and he's going to be talking for about 5 minutes on the purchase of electric vehicles. We're going to go to Simon Brace from the Lakes Electric Delivery Service, who's been a great supporter of CAF's. What he doesn't know about electric vehicles, dare I say, you don't need to know. But we've also got Cheryl Hitchcock, and I think it's important that we all hear from someone who's, without putting you down, Cheryl, is someone who just, another member of the public who wants to make a difference, who wants to live their life more sustainably, and has been on this journey of EVs for a number of years and has picked up lots of information, lots of tips about the costs of owning an electric vehicle. So we've got three specialists, and without further ado, I'm going to pass straight over to George, who's going to kick us off with a presentation on purchasing electric vehicles.
Yeah, I mean, it's where to start. There's if we'd had this conversation even 3 years ago, there would be very little choice about what you could buy in the EV marketplace. It's now massively exploded, but it's really massively exploded in the new vehicle marketplace. So there's a lot of choice, right from at the top Rimac down to Tesla, and then down to kind of the Jaguar I-Pace £60,000 mark, and then maybe down to kind of what we start to call kind of normal people's cars, Model 3s, but even then you're talking £40,000, and then below that is the kind of the smaller, the more traditional electric vehicles, the Renault Zoes, and the Nissan Leafs. Me being from Durham, Nissan Leafs are our speciality, so we are a stone's throw away from the factory that makes them. But the great news is that there's a growing used marketplace. So yes, buying your first EV might seem daunting because you might think, oh, well, they're all 40, 50, 60,000 pounds. That's not the case. We regularly sell Nissan Leafs that are 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 pounds, and they're the ideal first electric car. Along with Zoes, we sell quite a few BMW i3s as well. So all of the cars that have been out for, well, in the case of the Leaf and the Zoe, quite closely, kind of around about 9-10 years. So don't worry too much about the sticker price. There is an electric car that's affordable for everybody. obviously the cheaper and older an electric car, generally the range is lower. But the lowest range that you'll find, I think you can see over my shoulder, we've got a nice 2011 Nissan Leaf, so one of the first ever Nissan Leafs that came out. It's only got 8 of its 12 health bars on it. Still got 70% of its battery, and it'll still do 40, 50 miles. And with the UK's average commute being 25 miles, if you've got a plug at both ends, then that's a perfectly viable car, and that's £5,000. The great thing about that is in a year's time, it'll still be £5,000. That's got to its lowest depreciation. And weirdly, we can actually take that apart and sell its battery and motor for more than we can sell the car for. So there's always it's a great thing about electric vehicles is the hold the value, because their components are worth a lot of money. People want to buy the batteries for energy storage and want to buy the motors for converting classic cars to electric, which we also do. So that's a great, as an EV owner, that you know that your vehicle depreciates a hell of a lot less than other vehicles do. So that's one of the big factors. There's a price point for everybody, there's a range for everybody, and there's also the great feeling that you know that your car's not going to nosedive and be worth £200 when it fails its MOT. The second factor is that they just cost next to nothing to run. There's hardly any maintenance. I have no problem putting 12 months warranty on that 2011 Leaf, even with it having, I think it's got about 70,000 miles in it, because there's just nothing to go wrong with it. It's got one moving part. We have classic cars that we sell. Just in the cylinder head of a Morris Minor has 47 moving parts. No wonder they're not reliable. There's just so much wear and tear and stupidity going on in an internal combustion engine. And then these things are just a dream to buy, you know. So the two things, there's a car for every budget, a car for every range. One thing that we advocate a lot is buy the car that has the range for most of your journeys. Don't worry. Lots of people come to us and say, I need 200 miles range. When you actually analyse it, you don't. You need probably 50, 60 mile range 90% of the time, going to shops, dropping the kids off at school, all that stuff. And the amount of money that they save, what we do as a family, we've got a 2013 Nissan Leaf. And whenever we want to go anywhere long distance, we hire a Tesla. So we're lucky that just down the road in Langley Park, we have an EV rental company that specialises just in electric vehicles. So we've got a choice of Jaguar I-Pace, Tesla Model 3, Tesla Model S, whatever we want. So we just treat ourselves if we go away for a weekend, and we use whatever car suits the journey that we're going to do. So getting into electric vehicles, like I said, it's perfectly feasible for just about every budget. And you just need to think a little bit differently. Isn't it great? I love the fact that I'm a Tesla driver, but I'm only a Tesla driver when I need to be. I don't need to spend that 40, 50, 60,000 pounds. I've spent 6,000 pounds on a Nissan Leaf instead. So hopefully that gives you a flavour. I don't know exactly what you were expecting, but it kind of gives you a flavour of what's possible. And feel free to throw in as many questions as you can. I love answering them.
That's great. Thank you, George. That's just what we want as well, is that really positive start to this. And to, we talked about it, the transition being just and fair, and that your points about being there is an affordable EV for everybody. Yeah. And whether that's you're just renting it for a day, or whether you've got one that you've bought that does a certain amount of miles that fits in with your lifestyle and your daily your daily commute, that's just so important. So fire those questions into the question and answer, and I'm sure we'll bring George back in to answer them later on. So we're now going to move over to Simon Brace from the Lakes Electric Delivery Service. Innovative, you've been going for quite a few years now, Simon, and a real ambassador for electric vehicles. As you know, what's great as well is because Simon's been driving over the hills and down into the valleys of Cumbria, it's not a case of just motorway driving here. He knows the terrain, and it does make a difference. So Simon's going to talk a little bit about charging, and over to you, Simon.
Perfect. Can everybody see that? And that's perfect. Is it marvelous? Yeah. Shameful plug. There we go. That's me. That's what I do, and that's what I do it in. It's a 6-year-old Nissan ENV 200 with a 22 kilowatt hour battery that's probably at about 18.5 kilowatts. Now, range of about 70 miles on a good day, maybe 80, and during the winter about 65, 70. But it's not about me today, it's about charging. So what I've done is I've broken this down into 3 simple forms and 3 simple prices, because it can be as complicated as you want to make it. So types of charging, you've got your home charger. That's the one that will be installed on the side of your house or the side of your garage where you charge at home. And I would say 80 to 90% of your charging will be done at home. You then got your destination charging, which is the sort of thing you'll find at supermarkets, car parks in shopping centres and attractions, theme parks, National Trust properties, that sort of thing. The idea is park and rides for major cities like Oxford and Edinburgh and Glasgow, that sort of thing. The idea is you plug in and you leave your car there for maybe 2 to 6 hours, and it trickle charges pretty much like it does if you're parked at home. Then finally, we've got the rapid charging, which is the big pillar box type of things that you'll see at motorway service stations. Some supermarkets are installing them, and purpose-built charging hubs up and down the major A roads of the country. And they're the ones that charge your car in anything from 20 to 50 minutes. If you've got one of the larger battery mega cars, then you're probably looking at maybe just over the hour.
Sorry, Simon, do you want to we're just looking at the first slide. Are we supposed to be advancing through the slides?
Yeah, you're not seeing what I'm seeing?
I'm afraid we're just looking at the very first slide in your presentation.
Hmm.
Do you want me to just take over on the slides?
Yeah, I can stop.
Okay.
I can stop the share if you want to fire yours up, see if it's any better.
We'll see if it's any better. Okay, so can you see that?
Yeah, that's where I was.
Okay, perfect. Apologies for the interruption.
Right, so next one.
Oh, sorry. So yeah, so that's just demonstrating what you were saying then.
Yep. So home charging will cost you approximately 10 pence a kilowatt hour. Next slide. But it can be as low as free or even negative if you're on the Octopus Energy flexible tariff, which means you actually get paid to charge your car. Doesn't happen very often. I think last year it happened maybe half a dozen times, and the best price was about 11 pence a kilowatt hour. To actually, you got paid to charge a car. So that night, I think I was paid about £1.30, something like that, to charge my car up. And then there are certain fixed cost overnight prices, a bit like the old Economy 7 for heating. They do, if you're an EV owner, you can sign up. And overnight fees between sort of midnight and 6 a.m. are about 5 pence a kilowatt hour. At this stage, I'll say you don't really need to know what a kilowatt hour is, but you should know how many kilowatt hours you can fit into your battery. I mean, they could be called mango beans or elephants, in the fact that 10 mango beans in your car is 10 pence. You know, so a kilowatt hour is just a unit of energy, and cars come in various capacities, giving you the range. Okay, so back one.
Oh, sorry, beg your pardon.
So that means an average, which nowadays is about 40 kilowatt hours, an average EV will cost between nothing and about £4 to completely charge from empty at home. But it's highly unlikely that you'll ever actually be completely empty. You'll always have sort of 10 to 20% in the car when you arrive home, I would think. And it costs me on average about £1.20 to charge my van at home. And that's an average, of course. It can cost a lot less and it can cost a little bit more. Next slide. So destination charging costs approximately 20 pence a kilowatt hour. But You're getting the hang of this. Some supermarkets, retail parks and attractions will offer you free destination charging. So I'm not too sure. I think Tesco's maybe do it, and I know that a few of the Morrisons used to, whether they still do. But yeah, some places, as an incentive to reel the customers in, especially those with electric vehicles, obviously, you turn up, you're given for free, and you go back shopping, you come out, and you know it's not going to be massive, but you'll easily have covered your mileage to and from the supermarket. Our local Tesco's does it, and if we did that, I think we would end up, you know, with about 2 miles extra than what it took us to get to and from the shop. So what does that mean? Well, it means that an average 40 kilowatt EV will cost anywhere between £0 and £8 to charge from empty, but again, it will be highly unlikely it'll be completely empty. So it costs me on average about £3 to charge my van if I plug into a destination charger, not that that's something I do on a commercial basis. Next one. So finally, we've got rapid charging. This is approximately 30 pence a kilowatt hour, but as they say, this is where it can get extremely complicated. There are multiple operators and subscription models that exist, and it means that prices vary from 9 pence a kilowatt hour right up to 69 pence a kilowatt hour. The prices vary between suppliers and between devices you're using, and they can even differ on the same supplier, whether or not you use a contactless credit or debit card or their app, which is, you know, crazy and bonkers. One of the good things is that all new installed rapid chargers must accept standard contactless payment cards, i.e. a debit or a credit card with an RFID. Majority though still don't. You will have to be signed up to something and do something to get a charge. So what does that mean in pounds? Well, it means that an average EV costs anywhere between £3.60 and £27.60. Yeah, you read that right. There is a massive variance. The reason being there are certain suppliers that want to focus on certain cars, and there are certain places that are really expensive, and it is a complete minefield at the moment. But it costs me about £3.80 on average going to the average priced rapid chargers that I go to. Next slide. So in summary, you've got your home charging, which will be sort of 80% plus of your charging. That's the cheapest and the most frequent used. Destination charging can be cheap, can be free, depending on whether you have home charging or not, and depending on where you shop, it could be quite regular use. And then rapid charging, which is the most expensive, but it is by far the quickest. But most people will only be using that on a rare occasion that they'll go over the distance that their EV can travel, and they'll usually be using them on the motorway networks. And the future, well, we've got some massive charging hubs opening up around the country with 10 plus chargers, forecourt charging from companies like GridServe and FastNed, where it's basically the petrol station model, but with comfy seats, a coffee shop and meeting rooms, etc. And then finally, you've got vehicle to grid systems coming in for both commercial premises and homes, where you'll be plugging your car in, and when it's full, it'll start charging your house, powering your house, or you'll get paid to send energy back down the grid. So you'll be making money out of the energy stored in your battery, which I find interesting because I'm waiting for someone to nip to a local Tesco's, charge up for full, come home and plug it in and get paid to send it back down the grid. I don't know how that's going to work. That could be a quite nice little earner if you live somewhere. So there we go. That's the end of that presentation. That's just a brief cost summary of what it's like owning an EV. And then my contact details, if you want to find me for ask anything to do, especially with the commercial side of the vehicles or the commercial side of running a business on EVs. Thanks very much.
That's wonderful, Simon, and thank you, A, for keeping to time, B, for filling us with so much information, and C, for actually answering one of the questions, which was about white van man, which I know you've described yourself as before, except electric.
I did see that, yeah.
Electric white van man. So for the person that asked that, Simon is your go-to person. He's just a great demonstration of why lots of trades and delivery services should go electric ASAP. So thank you, Simon. Keep your questions coming into the question and answer space. We're looking at those now, and we're looking forward to answering them after Cheryl Hitchcock's exploration of what it's like to actually own an electric vehicle and what are the sort of running costs involved. So over to you, Cheryl, and thank you.
Okay, thank you, Phil. Okay, so I'm going to talk a bit about our experience of owning electric vehicles over the last 5 years. So we've only had an electric vehicle for our main day-to-day use for the last 5 years, and our other vehicle is a 32-year-old VW T25 camper van, which is very nice, but we don't like to put too many miles on that. Anyway, I'm going to give you a brief history of our electric car ownership, and I'm going to look particularly at the purchase costs and the running costs, and look a bit about what we're going to do next. So next slide, please. Okay, so our first electric car was a Renault Zoe, which we bought in October 2016. It had a 23 kilowatt-hour battery, and it had a range of between 70 and 100 miles. At the time, we were living in a little village in the Eden Valley, about 13 miles from the nearest main shops. So, as George was saying, although it didn't have a very big range, it did work for our day-to-day commute. You know, when we went into town, we could get there and back and charge up again at home. We did use chargers away from home a bit more when we had this first Zoe, because if you actually wanted to go walking in the lakes, you still had to charge before you came back. In terms of buying the Zoe, we decided that we didn't want to buy the car outright because we weren't sure what was going to be happening with the whole technology. You know, we felt as if we were still in sort of the Betamax video phase. So we decided that we would use a PCP lease agreement over 2 years from Renault Finance. At that time, it seemed to us that it was not a bad deal. We got a big discount from Renault, and we got the government grant of £4,500 at the time, which left us paying £140 a month for 24 months, which I thought wasn't bad for a new car. On top of that, though, we had the battery lease. Batteries at the time, I think people didn't really know how long they would last, and there was a certain amount of uncertainty about them. Batteries cost about £5,000. So I think at the time Renault only allowed you to lease the battery, I'm not sure, but we paid £80 a month to get 7,500 miles a year. With that arrangement, after 5 years, you would get a new battery if you kept the car, and Renault would also replace it if there was any significant degradation before then. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so at the end of the agreement, we decided we really liked the Zoe. It worked very well for us. The new Zoe had almost twice the battery capacity and a range of between 150 and 200 miles. However, the deal wasn't so good because Renault had underestimated the depreciation in the electric cars at that time. So the settlement figure was higher than the part exchange value. So we ended up giving Zoe 1 back to Renault, and then we bought a new Zoe, again with PCP finance. We still got the government grant, and we also got a decent Renault discount. But this time we were paying £176 a month for 36 months, which wasn't quite as good. But at the time, that's what we wanted to do. So we went ahead with the agreement. Again, we were leasing the batteries on the same arrangement. With this range, we actually found that we rarely charged away from home. We tended to, I mean, the furthest we probably went was Peebles or Ilkley or Skipton, and we had to kind of charge at our destination. But in general, we just charge from home. We tend to take the train if we're doing longer journeys. Next slide, please. Okay, so running costs. Well, there's no road tax, which is great. In terms of servicing, as George was saying, there really isn't a lot to go wrong. Because we were on the finance agreement, we used Renault dealership for our servicing, and it cost about £80 to £100, which wasn't bad. I don't know if this has changed much, but in the early days, we found that some of the dealerships didn't even have the expertise to service an electric vehicle. So with our first Zoe, the people we bought, the dealership we bought it from, 1 year later couldn't service it because they still didn't have any technicians that could do the job. I'm sure that's changing, but it probably means that it's less easy to go to a small corner garage for your servicing. Other people, George and others might know more about that. In terms of insurance, I don't think there's very much difference. I'm paid between £280 £340 a year. I think there has been something in the press recently that said insurance on EV vehicles is coming down. So that all seems fine. And home charging, around 4p a mile, which is good. One thing that we haven't covered so far, when we used to live in the Eden Valley, we had solar panels on our roof. So when the sun shone, with a bit of technology, we could charge for free. So that's also good. Okay, so what next? Well, the Zoe 2 is coming to the end of the agreement in October this year. So we were looking at what we're going to do next. And I decided really that the time had come to buy a second-hand Zoe of the latest model. But then we were beginning to feel that our camper van was getting a bit elderly and we should perhaps not be driving it around. And so we decided we're going to have an electric camper van. So we traded in Zoe 2 and bought a new Nissan ENV200. So I'm going to be Black Van Girl. And we got in just before the government reduced the grant on electric vehicles, and we got a discount from Nissan as well. The ENV200 Tecna does, it's got a range of about 120 to 160 miles. It's got a 40 kilowatt battery. So we're finding that the range is reduced from the Zoe, but obviously it's a larger vehicle. I suspect if it's fully loaded, it will, the range will decrease again. But now we're waiting for our van to be converted. So, and we're going to sell our nice VW. Somebody else will enjoy it. Okay, thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Cheryl, Simon, and George, for that that introduction to the costs of owning and driving and charging those electric vehicles. There's a real range in there. We are going to go to the questions and answers, well, hopefully answers as well. We've got some questions. The first one, Lisa, is about, Lisa's looking at secondhand Zoes. Is it better to buy the battery? And I think I'll go to Cheryl and George on that one. Cheryl, maybe if you've got some experience, because you've obviously been looking at whether you purchase outright or whether you lease, and then maybe we'll ask George on that one.
Well, if as I said, I was thinking about buying a second-hand Zoe this time round, and I would probably have bought the battery this time. I think the battery lease seems a bit of an anachronism at the moment now, a few years on. But you do get quite a lot of security with that leasing, and I think the lease is more like sort of £49, £50 a month now. I think it has reduced, but Simon has.
Yeah. So thanks, Cheryl. We'll go to George and then Simon. I know you want to put your penny's worth in there, George.
I would mirror what Cheryl said. It's in the early days of EVs when both Nissan and Renault were leased batteries. It was because even the manufacturers didn't really know how long the batteries were going to last. we know that the batteries last a long time as long as they're well cared for, and even ones that aren't well cared for still last, and the warranty's there as well. My personal preference is if we buy a car to sell that's got a lease on it, we buy the lease out to have the battery. Renault and Nissan are both quite happy for you to buy the battery on leased vehicles. But there is a flip side to that coin. If you've got a vehicle with a battery lease on, say you're struggling to afford the finance on a car, on an electric car, you only need to finance the actual car, not the battery. So it's easier to get approval for finance on a leased battery vehicle because the battery lease part is just a rental agreement between you and Renault or you and Nissan. So there is cases where sometimes it's better to have a leased battery because you're taking on less debt and just renting the battery. So it's every single person we deal with on an electric vehicle, it's very tailored and bespoke to knowing all these different nuances and guiding them in the right direction.
And George, just in terms of a punter coming to you and asking you about the batteries and the leases, what sort of questions should those the participants in these webinars be asking about that battery lease?
Well, first of all, the one thing if you're buying a car is to the two main people that do lease batteries in the UK are Renault and Nissan, and the actual finance company is the same company for them both, which is called RCI. You should, if you're buying a Renault Zoe or a Nissan Leaf and you're not certain about battery ownership, you should phone RCI and say who owns the battery. It's not always 100% because even they get it wrong sometimes. So you can, if they won't speak to you, you need to speak to a Renault or a Nissan dealer. It's usually easier to speak to the supplying dealer. So look at the number plates that are on the car, and you'll then find out who the supplying dealer was. So those are the things that you've got to look at. But then if you are speaking to Renault or Nissan to find out if it is leased, you can ask the question of how much is it to buy the battery as well. So you can have an informed decision around what you want to do.
That's great. George, Simon.
Yeah, well, through personal experience, 6 years ago, the wife and I went through exactly this same conundrum because we bought a Zoe. At the time, Renault only did leased batteries, but just as we were about to sign on the line, as a trial, they released 50 with what they called the I badge, which meant the battery was inclusive. And the dealer came back to us and said, you're just about to buy one. Do you want one of these where you actually own the battery? At the time, it was something like £8,000 more expensive because all you were doing was paying for the battery, but there was no monthly lease. I don't think there's a right or a wrong answer. You just do what you feel you're comfortable with. I was happy because I knew a battery chemist. And also I'm from a technical background anyway, so I weighed up the pros and cons. I knew what way the battery technology was going. So for us, 6 years ago, we signed on the line both feet in and bought the battery outright. I think, with hindsight, it was probably a risky thing to do, but it turned out that it worked out okay. But I don't think there's a right or a wrong answer. You just go for whichever you feel is the best. But battery technology has advanced so much that, like George says, there's only really Renault and Nissan secondhand. I don't think Renault do it new, do they, George, anymore? I don't think it's been
not that I'm aware of.
No, so you'll only come across it in the secondhand market.
Yeah.
There's a question. Thanks, team. There's a question that I think Cheryl's gone a long way to answering on, and it's the question that lots of people ask is about buying or leasing an EV. And obviously this is a webinar about cost. George, do you have anything to add to Cheryl's really clear sort of process for thinking about, do I buy or do I lease? Yeah,
I mean, if you're looking at it, it's something that's new to 3 years old. It's even an electric car is a depreciating asset. So why would you want to own something that's losing money? Generally, if you're looking at something that's within manufacturer's warranty, then I would say lease it. You're just renting it, and you know what the costs are going to be. Everything's fixed. You can kind of hedge your bets a little bit by going with a PCP, because then at the end of a PCP means that you've got the ability to buy it. So say your final payment was £10,000, but that car was worth £14,000 when you got to the end of it. Great, you buy it for the 10,000, you sell it for 14, you make yourself £4,000. If it's only worth £5,000, you just give it back. You've really covered your backside in that case. Some lease deals, I mean, as we've been talking, I'm constantly getting pop-ups of everything. There's just been a pop-up for a Volkswagen electric transporter van. They're only 32 kilowatts though, but they only want £160 plus VAT a month for businesses. And I'm thinking, oh, that's quite cheap. So there are good deals to be had on lease stuff, especially if manufacturers are finding stuff slow to shift, which I can imagine is what's happened with Volkswagen with the VW Transporter. And then once things get over 3 years old, the depreciation is really slowed down and massively slowed down with electric vehicles. That's at the point where I would say, right, let's start looking at buying these through the traditional methods of hire purchase. Again, you don't, even with hire purchase, you don't own the vehicle until you've paid it all off, but the loan's secured against the vehicle, so it's less interest rate than it would be with a personal loan generally. So again, it's very much horses for courses as to what your scenario fits and which product is right for it. So that not only are you choosing the right vehicle, the right range, but also the right financial product to buy it. So yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for that, George. And I think you'd probably agree that the electric vehicle market now, the whole idea about finance and about leasing, whether it's the car itself or the battery, it's a whole new arena where some manufacturers are considering not even selling cars in a few years' time. Everything will be leased. So this whole arena of finance is something that we all need to understand better. There's a great question here about what do you do if you don't have a driveway and you want to charge? What are the options? So Simon has covered quite a lot of them there in terms of the home charging versus the destination charging versus the rapid charging. I'm going to ask my colleague Nigel to come in a moment on another option, Charge My Street. But Simon, do you want to just expand on the options if you don't have a driveway?
Yeah, well, it makes me a little bit. This question keeps popping up in conversations and forums that I'm on. You see, I can understand people being frustrated, but being able to charge at home is a bonus. It's not an essential. Because what do you do at the moment? You haven't got a petrol pump in your garage, have you? How do you fuel your car now? You go somewhere, you fuel it up, and that's what you do once or twice a week. Well, you do it with an EV if you can't charge at home, but it's even more convenient because if you can find a destination charger while you do your shopping, or so you do it while you're doing something else. You don't have to sit, go to a petrol station, stand in a queue while the woman in front does her weekly shop, because it's not a petrol station anymore. It's basically a supermarket with a forecourt and all this sort of stuff. So while it's great to be able to charge at home, and obviously it's the cheapest to charge at home, unfortunately there will always be places like high-rise flats and estates where there's greens and that, and you can't actually get to your front door or your back door to charge. And that's where places like GridServe and Fastnet with their forecourt model will be coming on. And as battery technology increases, the charging gets faster. There's some of the Porsches and that can charge up in 8 minutes, whereas the average time to fill a petrol car at a petrol station is 12 minutes. People say to me, "Oh no, it takes me a couple of minutes and I'm away." Well, you're not. Trust me. And I actually had to queue for petrol because we've got a vehicle that needs to tow, and that's another whole area that gets my back up. But so we have got a fossil fuel vehicle still, and I had to queue behind 2 other vehicles because the petrol station was so busy the other day. So yeah, while it's unfortunate if you can't charge at home, as the infrastructure improves, as technology improves, but crucially, even now, you use rapid chargers or you use destination chargers, as that's the only option.
Thank you, Simon. Nigel, do you want to just say about a little word about the Charge My Street project that Cumbria Action for Sustainability is involved in?
Yeah, sure, Phil. So just to endorse what Simon has said, first of all, I think building charging into your daily or weekly routine is fantastic, and it effectively take little or zero time to charge if you're able to incorporate it into, say, having a meal at a restaurant or parking at your usual workplace or doing a supermarket shop. It's very much more convenient, really, than diverting to a petrol station in many instances. But CAFS is part of a multi-partner program which is working on installing public charge points in West England with an organisation called Charge My Street. And this is a government-funded program. And the aim is to add more public charging, particularly for householders who may not have private off-street parking, so terraces and flats particularly, and also trying to help rural areas where these may not be a top priority for commercial charge point installers. So we're working with organisations ranging from village halls through to hotels, local authorities, a whole range of types of location where there may be existing parking space. They're places that people will go to anyway, or they're nearby housing like terraces, flats. And the aim behind this project is to add to the public charging offer, so it will help people in those situations. It's not going to solve the challenge by itself, but it's a contribution to that. And other organisations are also working on other ways to increase the public charging offer. So overall, charging is ramping up as the switch to electric takes hold.
Great. Thanks for that, Nigel. This evening's webinar is about the cost of ownership and the cost of using and charging. George, there's a specific question about from Adi Powell, who is actually Charge My Street, about whether the second-hand market will ever get so low as it has in the petrol and diesel world, where you can pick up a car for £500, for example. Do you think, Ada's asking, will that marketplace for electric vehicles ever get so low that it can be really affordable for people on a very low income?
I would be very surprised if it does in the next 5 years. There's the issue. Well, the great issue is we've got more demand than we've got supply in the used marketplace, because obviously it was a slow take up from 10 years ago. And if you think about it, there's not been massive numbers of EVs sold in the UK, even going back 4 years. It still wasn't a huge number per year. It's getting bigger and bigger now. So it's going to be 5 years before we start seeing things come down in value. But then because they're so cheap to run, it keeps their prices up higher. So like I say, a £5,000 EV, it costs you buttons to run each year. So it soon pays itself back in the saving in running costs. So people will keep hold of them and they'll pass them. We have people who pass them around the family already. So the availability of used EVs is going to be supply constrained for quite a while, which will keep that value of them up, which is great when you're an owner. Once you're on the merry-go-round, it's fantastic because the value either stays still or only depreciates a little bit. I've got cars that we've bought that have gone up in value. So the £500 EV banger isn't going to happen anytime soon.
That's really clear, George. And what's really nice is having a panel member who speaks honestly rather than just tries to please everyone who's here. It isn't going to drop out, that low very quickly. And so thanks for being clear about that. Simon, white van person, we've got a question from Ro Baker from CAFS asking about is now the time to get an electric white van? What are the sort of prices for an electric van? And an ancillary question, do you get a home charger at the same time? Does it come with the van?
That all depends on whose van you buy. I think some manufacturers do give charge points away as an incentive for you to purchase the van. When is or was the best time to buy an electric van? I would have said about 3 years ago was probably the best time to buy an electric van. I've had two, and on both I've made over £600. My last one was a little Peugeot Partner van, and I had that for 2.5 years, and my part exchange price that I was given was £800 more than I actually paid for it. So I mean, it blew my mind. It was the first time that's ever happened on any vehicle I've ever bought. Is it the right time to buy an electric van now? If the models that are available now are affordable for you, and from a business sense, if you're buying one commercially as opposed to just you're one of these people that likes to own a van rather than a car, from a commercial point of view, if the vans that are available now suit your business model, do the range that you require for your job or the job that they need to do, then absolutely yes, buy one. But it's a bit like buying a mobile phone. It's a bit like buying a laptop. Around the corner, there's always going to be a better one that goes further, does more. Whether it will be cheap or not, I don't know. The problem we've got with commercial vehicles at the moment is cost. It's not range, it's not weight carrying. To some degree, some of the ones that are coming out can actually tow up to like 1.5 ton plus. So it's not can they do the job, it's cost. The van I would like is about £86,000. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen anytime soon. So if the vans that are available now do the job that you require them to do, then yes, ditch the diesel, because you will save so much money. Speaking from a business point of view, you will save so much money on fuel, so much money on maintenance, etc. That it will just blow your mind. But they are still very expensive. When I bought the one you see behind me 3.5 years ago, it was 3 times the price of a diesel model. It's paid for itself, mind, but you have to have that. You have to have that mindset, because to look at those figures next to each other on a sheet of paper, it's not good. And it's still the same now. A brand new EV van is not quite 3 times as much, but definitely twice, 2.5 times the price of a normal diesel van.
Another honest answer. Thank you, Simon. I know there's a couple of questions here about the cost of installing a home charger. Cheryl, do you want to just share your experience there?
Okay. So when we first bought our Renault Zoe, Renault would install a charge point for you at your home. However, I was living in a passive house which we built, and we didn't want anybody who didn't know what they were doing to come and sort of drill a hole in the wall, because it's supposed to be airtight. So we'd sort of preempted by trying to get a cable in when we were building it. It turned out it wasn't quite big enough, so we had to have a very techie neighbour do a very good fix for us, and we got somebody else to put the charge point in. I can't remember how much it cost. But it was a bit of a specialised case. And I've moved into Kendal, and I've probably bought one of the few houses that already had a charge point.
Okay, lucky you. Well done. George, do you offer any advice about the home charging and the government grants?
So basically, as long as you qualify for not you, as long as the installer is qualified to get the government grant for you, 550 quid is what a 7 kilowatt charger will be, an untethered one. I always advise to go for untethered. The difference is, tethered means it comes with a cable with a plug on the end of it. Untethered means you plug your charging cable into it. I always advise untethered, because then if you change your electric vehicle, you don't have to then cough up more money for them to come and change the cable on the charger. And the two people we recommend are Podpoint and Eo. There's quite a few different ones out there. The thing that you've got to remember is they're not actually chargers, they're just a plug on the wall. The car has the charger in it. All it is a 240 volt outlet that's sat on the wall to charge your car at home. It's not really that complicated. And installers are making more money out of it than they really need to. So prices will drop. But if you budget 550 quid, and then the other thing is that if a manufacturer is offering you a free charger, it's not free, it's included in the price of the car. But take it if you can get it, because the dealer doesn't have any discrepancy that if you don't take it, you don't get any more money off because the dealer isn't in control of that part of the price. So, can I just clarify something as well, Phil? The one thing I forgot to mention before, and Simon mentioned, we both kind of danced around it. In that question about the banger cars and the cheap prices, you have to look at total cost of ownership. That's the big thing, really. If you look at a £500 10-year-old car, petrol or diesel car, look at how much that's going to cost you in diesel, if it needs a clutch and exhaust, all of the things that go wrong with 10-year-old internal combustion engines. Add that all up, and then look at a £5,000 EV to run over 3 years. And I'll, without even looking at the figures, it'll be cheaper to run the EV, and it's a much nicer drive as well. It just drives better.
Yeah. We talked about the driving. That's great.
Yeah. So yeah, come for the costs. You'll fall in love with the drive, and then we'll save the planet while we're doing it.
Yeah.
Everyone will want one.
Thank you for that. Just a point that if you're obviously listening, the audience is obviously listening to the answers, but if you do go to the question and answer, you will find that if you click on that, the second tab along, it says open, answered and dismissed. So you will find some of the answers have been that there are written answers as well, and of course you can scroll through those. But I'm just going to ask a couple of the earlier questions. Very specific. Smart meter on an Octopus off-peak tariff. Do you need a smart meter?
Yes, you do.
Yes, you do. There's a great quick question there.
We had to have one in. We had to have one installed. Best thing we ever did.
Okay, we're just going to rattle through the quick questions. We've got a couple of minutes left. Are EVs stolen for their batteries, George?
No, because the idiot thieves would electrocute themselves.
Okay, that's great. A question about rapid chargers up north. Do we have enough? And
are
they
too many rapids?
Say that again, Simon.
You can never have too many rapids. And the motorway network is served well, but up until a few months ago they were rubbish. But they're all being swapped out, and they'll all be marvellous in another few months.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree with Simon. It's not the number; it's the reliability. It's the problem.
Yeah. The motorway ones haven't always been that reliable up to now. They've been a bit flaky.
Once GridSafe gets it sorted out, we'll all be really happy.
George, does the range that the manufacturer says correspond to it in real world?
Well, in defence of the manufacturer, it's not the manufacturer that says it. It's the testing cycles, which are all done in laboratory conditions. Anytime you say a manufacturer's claim, it's at least we always work on 2/3. But then what we really do is we go on the ev-database.uk, which has every single new vehicle available on it. But then if you Google EV database and whatever used vehicle you're looking for, the archives are there as well, and it tells you a real world range, and that is the real world range. So it'll tell you that a 40 kilowatt hour Leaf will do 135 miles, which is what it'll do. So not the 200 miles that the NEDC cycle says. So.
Yeah,
right.
I would also add, unless it's a brand new model, go on the forums and just find owners of that model, and they'll tell you how it is. They'll either be absolutely raging that it does half what they told it, or they'll be saying actually it's pretty close to what they say.
Great. Cheryl, you were going to add something.
Oh, yeah, I was going to say that I felt that Renault had been quite fair with the Zoe predictions, because they did give a real world estimate, and it's not been half bad. So I think I wasn't surprised. I've sometimes got slightly more than I expected, which is good.
Excellent. We are actually at the end of our webinar. I'm going to give Cheryl, Simon and George the one or two sentences or a little paragraph just to sum up their feelings, or just the one message you would give the audience about what we've talked about tonight before we finish. Cheryl.
Okay, well, after I'd had my first Zoe, I didn't want to go back to an ICE car. So I've really enjoyed the drive, and despite the short range and certain range anxiety initially, I really like it, and I think it's the way forward.
Excellent. We've got a poll coming up here in a moment. I'm going to ask Simon just your end of webinar thought.
I would say if you're thinking about changing to EV, then do it, because you know, from a personal point of view, they're just better. I mean, what can you say? It's a bit, I call it the flat screen principle. When flat screen televisions first came out, they were really expensive. Only the rich could afford them, but wow, everybody was impressed by them. Then as the prices filtered down, people weren't waiting for their old television to break to buy a new one. They were literally throwing their old one away to buy a flat screen TV because they were just better. And that's pretty much it with EVs.
That's great. Thank you, Simon. And George?
If you're thinking about buying an EV, go and drive one. You'll fall in love with it, and speak to people who own the one that you're thinking about buying. They're the best salesmen, and they'll tell you the real world scenario of what it's like to own.
Brilliant. Thank you for that, all of you. Okay, Kieran has thrown up an end poll there. I just asked two things. If you can quickly click on that and just let us know how you feel at the end of the webinar. If you feel like you're a bit more knowledgeable, you're fairly knowledgeable, very knowledgeable, click on that. That would be wonderful. I know it's time to leave. As you leave, it would be we'd be really grateful for just any comments that you can throw our way. Either about how you found this evening, how you found the speakers, about CAFs, or about your ambitions. Just some comments for us to capture would be wonderful. And finally, I'm going to thank Kieran, who's been our technical whiz for this evening. Kieran's a hugely valuable member of the CAFs team. Nigel, who's been incessantly and wonderfully throwing up some links to some really useful resources on the CAFs website and to everybody. And last but not least, to Cheryl, to Simon, and to George, who have given up a summer's evening free to help our charity and to help you. So enormous thanks to you all, Cheryl, George, and Simon. And the rest of you, the audience, make the transition if you can. Just because you drive an electric vehicle or a diesel vehicle or a petrol diesel doesn't make you a better or worse person. It just, please consider the use of driving in some. And if you can afford to switch to an EV, I think Cheryl and Simon and George have told you, absolutely, it's a great experience. So have a good evening, and Kieran will close us down.